Welcome to SDA Mastery, the podcast series hosted by Tania Gomez Consulting. In each episode, we'll be sharing valuable insights and tips that can help you learn the intricacies of specialist disability accommodation. We will demystify the entire SDA process, give you direct access to experts in the field, and help you to discover what life is like as an SDA provider. Whether you're thinking about leaping into SDA or you're looking to level up your existing NDIS business, you're in the right place. Come on in, let's explore the SDA space together.
So welcome Rachel and Karen to SDA Mastery, and today we're going to have a chat about the relationship between a SIL and an SDA provider. To begin with, I might get you both to introduce yourselves and a little bit about your businesses, and then I'll ask you some questions about the relationship between both your organisations. Rachel, do you want to start?
Sure, I'd love to. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
So if you've listened to the SIL one already, my name is Rachel. I'm the founder and CEO of Allara Support Services. We are supported independent living specialists. We've been established since 2020 and made the conscious decision from the beginning to do one thing and do it really well, and that is SIL.
Yep. And Karen from MyLife Housing.
Yes. My name is Karen, and I am the SDA provider. We provide mainly accommodation in the form of apartments and villas, and at the moment they're sort of dotted around west of Sydney, Illawarra, and the Central West region. We were also established in 2020, and I was actually living abroad for about 12 years and came back, and after a sort of a health scare, I decided I wanted to do something a bit more meaningful, something that actually positively impacted people's lives, and so I decided to start down the journey of becoming an SDA provider. And so in terms of what we do as an SDA provider, we really just focus on sort of the bricks and mortar. So as the name suggests, it's all the accommodation that is funded with an SDA funding. And so we typically, support residents, to understand whether they have or are eligible for SDA funding. And if they are eligible, then we take them through a process to try and understand what accommodation would be best suited to their needs. And then we basically help with the transitioning, from wherever they might be, hospital, nursing home, mum and dad, into the SDA accommodation, and we sort of handhold them through the process with the help of the SIL provider.
Wonderful. And you've talked a bit about your role with bricks and mortar. Rachel, what do you see as the difference between the SIL provider and the SDA provider when it comes to the responsibilities towards the participant?
Yeah, so the simplest way of me explaining it is SDA is the brick and mortar, as in the dwelling or accommodation, and the SIL is for the care of the participants that reside there.
Mm.
Yeah.
And will an SDA participant in an SDA home always have a SIL provider?
They should always have a care provider in most instances. So whether they're called a SIL provider or, they're funded under core supports, they will have some element of care, or they may have informal supports providing additional care as well.
Great. And Karen, is there anything you would add to the explanation of the difference between the SIL and the SDA provider?
The two can sort of merge in some cases. We tend to find, for example, if a participant is living in our accommodation, but they're being cared for by Allara's support team, there is this sort of, roles can get sort of merged a bit as to what falls into an SDA provider's responsibility versus the SIL responsibility. And I think as we talk through, I will highlight where these instances can actually potentially cause issues. But generally, if you've got a good SIL provider, it actually works really, really well.
Mm. I've often heard that SDA providers feel that the success of their SDA dwelling, or the secret of having a long-term participant in the SDA premises, is really having a great SIL provider in place. Would you agree with that?
I do agree with it. I think it's absolutely one of the key elements. I think that, this is provided that we get the accommodation part sorted. And so, if we get that part right and we, do the maintenance that, is required and, address the repairs in a reasonable state, if the actual assistive technology that we put in there actually works and does what it should do, if we help the participants to modify parts of the home to make it theirs, usually that's sort of us doing our bit. But even sometimes when we get all of that right, if the care on site, and that's usually provided by the SIL provider, if the day-to-day care is not great, then yes, a participant, as nice as their home is, would probably tend to start wanting to live somewhere else or tend to look. And now that there is more choice around SDA accommodation out in the market, they have the flexibility to do that.
Yeah, right. And so from your perspective as an SDA provider, what do you think makes a good SIL provider?
A good SIL provider, in my opinion, is someone who supports participants with dignity and with respect. So really they're the two key elements, and you want those elements to filter down into the team that are on the ground, the SIL team. And so the carers on site that are providing that support, you want them to have empathy, you want them to be caring, you want them to be nurturing, and really putting the participants' needs first. And I think that it's critical, a good or a great SIL provider actually is an open-minded provider who's actually willing to collaborate with other providers that do drop-in support. So a participant can typically have more than one provider, and so it's really important, if it's going to be the on-site provider, that they actually can collaborate and they're really putting the needs of the resident first and foremost before sort of business requirements.
And Rachel, would you add to that as far as what makes a great SIL provider, other than just all use Allara?
Yeah, the fact that we're amazing. But Karen makes a very good point. It has to, the values alignment and the morale of the staff has to filter, from the top. And it's very hard when you start growing and scaling a business to keep that same level of quality there as well. So it's something that you have to continuously improve on the way that you continue to evolve as a business, particularly as you grow and scale, for sure.
Yeah. And why is this relationship between the SIL and the SDA provider important? One could think that it's just like any other business transaction, that once the actual premises is built and the care, it seems from an outside's perspective that your job is to build the home and to build it correctly and maintain that. But once the care is supported, it's almost over to you to maintain that participant. If that's the case and you do your job well first, then your job becomes easier. Is there a need for ongoing collaboration and a relationship between you?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we collaborate a lot with our SDA providers. So obviously, even once you transition into the home, might be modifications such as handrails, different, hoist installations. They might want to apply for a pet. They, might have issues with plumbing or standard traditional things that might happen when living in a home, which still need to be managed by the SDA provider. So there's continuous collaboration in our relationship. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think also, is that having both SDA and SIL provider, it allows the participant to also provide feedback and in some instances complaints to either party as well, whether it be pertaining to the care or pertaining to the dwelling, and then it's up to us to continue to work collaboratively for that participant in order to achieve an outcome that meets their needs and keeps them happy and satisfied and safe.
So would you say that it's also almost another level of oversight for you or for both of you to make sure that your part of the arrangement is being completed, because you're keeping an eye on the maintenance of the property and you're keeping an eye on the supports being fit for purpose, so together you're ensuring the best outcome for the participant?
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about it that way before. And what do you two collaborate together on a number of SDA dwellings. What do you do specifically to make sure that you've got a good relationship, open communication, etc.?
Allara and MyLife are both sort of founder-led organisations. So, not only did we start our businesses around about the same time, we do have similar values and we sort of share similar work ethics. And so we're both, and our teams are quite sort of nimble, efficient. We're really proactive. We live and breathe our business. And so Rachel and I talk often. We meet, we talk. Sometimes we can talk 5 times a day. We encourage that collaboration with the teams because, again, it's not just the two of us. It's the teams that are on the ground and servicing the participants. We make sure we have fun. I mean, and it's not a hard thing to do with Rachel. So, and that healthy relationship or collaboration that we have it's essential because it's really hard if there's no transparency, honesty, a goodwill between the two companies. It quickly, I think the people that sort of tend to miss out or suffer are the residents who feel like they're sort of, this sort of stuck in the middle of two organisations that are not on the same page or don't have, shared values or are not putting the participants' requirements and needs first and foremost. So,
yeah, that was kind of my question as well. Was what happens if the relationship goes bad? Obviously, if the relationship's going well, the participant's benefiting. If the relationship isn't going well, obviously that puts pressure back on the participant. Is that something that you consider or you do things to try and minimise that risk, or is that just down to choosing the right partnership, or is it just, how do you maintain that and put the participant in front of any issues that you might be having or, disagreements that you might be having, differences of opinion?
Well, we haven't yet had to overcome a difference of opinion yet in our working relationship because the participant is at the forefront of everything that we do. And it is, we work together in whatever way we have to in order to meet the needs of the people that we care for. We've committed to that, So we haven't had to overcome, any times, well, I certainly haven't with MyLife where there's been any misalignment in terms of working towards the same goal. I suppose if an issue did come up, I have, great confidence that we could work together as a team to ensure that, alongside all of the relevant stakeholders, because it's not just Allara and MyLife, the participant is the driver of their own life. They're in the driver's seat, so we're really just backseat passengers, so they're in control of their life. So, first of all, it's making sure that they're part of that conversation, that their relevant stakeholders are a part of that conversation, and that we're just facilitating the care and the housing for that individual. So I think it's critical that you choose a good partner if you're going to collaborate, in SIL and SDA or in any aspect under the NDIS. But, typically if you're going to work closely with somebody, you need to be really assured that that they're the right fit for you and your participants, particularly if you're going to appoint them as a SIL provider in a building that you have as an SDA provider. And we've seen other breakdowns of relationships across the sector. And you're right, the only person that it impacts in the end is the participant. So if you can avoid that for them from the beginning through doing your due diligence, then I think that's a critical step.
Yeah.
And it's about not being afraid to have the tough conversations.
Absolutely.
And, we have enough sort of goodwill in our, collaboration that we can make someone accountable if we do need to. We do openly encourage participants to give us feedback, whether it's about what we're doing or what about what Allara are doing, things like surveys as well. And I'm sure both organisations do surveys to try and flesh out any niggling sort of things that actually, in the end up blowing up and becoming a big issue. So we try and sort of get all of that out and in the open and discuss it and making sure that nothing festers before, it's too late.
Yeah, and often we're relying on so many other people.
Yeah.
Like obviously Allara is dependent on the quality of care that's provided on the ground, which we try and do as much as we can to control that. And MyLife might be, subjected to, a really lazy tradesman, or something similar. So often we're at the mercy of other people, which means that, Karen and I or any of our team members having conversations, it's often just about having a transparent conversation between us and then finding the resolution, even if it means we have to have a difficult conversation for sure.
And you touched on the SDA provider appointing a SIL provider, which is something I hear often. Do you see it as the SDA provider is appointing the SIL provider? I know in an ideal world we would have the participant choosing a SIL provider, but how much of the choice of the SIL provider does the SDA provider have?
I think it comes down to the style of dwelling. So when we're looking at the collaboration that MyLife and Allara do in the apartment concierge model, in that particular dwelling, in order to represent value for money for the residents, there's typically one SIL appointed provider to do something like concierge support, and then those residents can then choose their one-on-one or plan supports provider over and above that. I think in a traditional group home setting or in any other setting, I think that can change. And I think that the SIL provider can be appointed by the participant, So I think it just is dependent on the model. Would you agree?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
And if we were to be in a situation where, you do have, an overwhelming majority of residents that are not happy with the chosen sort of concierge provider, we would look to try and address that and potentially, choose another SIL provider.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that like you said, the good SIL providers, and there's more than just Allara, but the good SIL providers do want to work with other providers. We do want to collaborate. Our best interest is in the participant and them getting the choice and control about who comes into their home and provides them care. So it's very often that if you're working with a good SIL provider, that you'll work with a multitude of SIL providers. So the SDA provider still has to engage with and do their due diligence around everyone coming in the building.
Absolutely.
Correct?
Yep.
You have collaboration agreements with, hundreds of SIL providers.
That's right. Yeah.
And I'm sure you know, Tania.
And often, sometimes I'll get a call and somebody will say, if I can't bring my my support worker that I've had for X number of years, then I won't move. And so it is a deal breaker for a lot of people. So they want to be able to have continuity and people that they know and trust.
And Karen, from your perspective, what advice would you have to a SDA provider who is looking for the unicorn SIL provider?
My tip would be to look to align with a provider that shares sort of your values and where you can find some common ground on your working styles. So as an example, it would be a challenge, say if you're a small startup, nimble sort of SDA provider and you want to align with a large national SIL provider who, has got layers and layers of decision makers. And so you'll tend to find that decisions don't get made very quickly. And I think in the long term, that would prove to be quite frustrating and inefficient. And so that misalignment I don't know that is practical or efficient. So that would be my first tip. Probably secondly, I would ensure that you're realistic about what your expectations are of a SIL provider when you do sort of shortlist. I think it's really important to be clear and realistic about what your responsibilities are, what you think their responsibilities are, and especially around the topics of sort of, whose responsibilities are to get the participants or to find them, because sometimes it is a bit of a grey area. And I think that would be really key to address early on.
Would you add to that at all?
I mean, what's the thing that the unicorns have on their head?
A horn?
It's
The
a horn.
yeah.
I was like, horn. I was just trying to think of that. But,
You forgot yours at home.
Yeah, no, I left mine at home. But I think Karen makes a really good point in that it is a collaborative relationship. So it's a long-term relationship. So you've got to enjoy working together.
Yeah.
And it is a collaboration. So you need to be able to work together, have a joint effort. It's not just set and forget.
Yeah.
So it's about being a part of along on this journey. For as long as sounds like a wedding, I think as long as we shall live.
You're writing your vows already.
I do.
As long as the participants want us around.
Yes, exactly.
And Rachel, from your perspective, what makes a great SDA provider?
I think definitely values alignment has to be number one. I think that they need to be ethical, that they need to carry themselves with, conduct themselves, in an ethical fashion, which I can hand on heart say that MyLife do so well, which is why we love partnering with them. I think if they can simplify the jargon, for the end user, it can get complex. So as much as they can simplify it for the end user and make it as simple as possible just to move into their home. That they're participant centric in their approach, so they don't just use that as a fluffy word, but they actually put it into practice. That they work well with others, that they sort of handle complaints and feedback in a reasonable, timely fashion, with the goal to meet the needs of the participant. The normal ones, like they're honest and transparent, that they're kind, that they're passionate, that they really care about the product too, that they really care about, creating a home which is beautiful and aesthetically pleasing and in a nice place. And, Karen should have been an interior designer in previous life, so she does a really good job. Also in MyLife, I should have just pigeonholed poor Karen in there, but her and her team do a really good job of making sure that it's a really nice, aesthetically pleasing home, that they try and not make look, like disability housing.
Yeah.
So I'm sure there's lots more, but.
Oh, thank you.
So it's funny to hear you both talk about what's a great SDA provider and a great SIL provider. Neither of you mentioned experience or tenure in the space, which is interesting. Because maybe it's not that relevant, but the things that you've said are really hard to quantify, right? Like, I think when you're interviewing someone for a job, which would be similar to interviewing them or screening them to be in collaboration, people have put their best foot forward. And so they will tell you their values aligned. They will tell you that they have integrity. I don't know anyone who doesn't have integrity who will tell you they don't have integrity, right?
You'd be surprised at some of the SDA providers I've interviewed.
Is that because they lead with the money?
Disability housing, because
they lead with the money and they have the money conversation first.
Yeah.
So
I think that I don't know. For me, I think you can kind of lead with intuition sometimes.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I think, is it the same for you, or do you, when you're doing due diligence for SIL providers, do you go and have a look at their current SIL operations and speak to current SIL participants around how happy they are or how well cared for they are?
I think the next SIL provider we appoint, if not Allara, definitely I would speak to as many, support coordinators who are key in this, journey. Definitely the participants, the support workers, the people on the ground, and it is a workforce that can be quite transient.
Yeah.
So you quickly know who's actually a good employer or a great place to work versus those that are not.
Yeah.
And on the other side as well, when dealing with developers, you can smell when someone is coming in just for the money opportunity.
Yeah.
And really have not got the right sort of intent going into the NDIS scheme. And I think you need to sort of have both. So we all need to be ethical in this space.
Yeah.
And I think, like we said, runs on the board.
Yeah.
You've seen it, they've tried and tested it, that they do it, that they've got a product that they're already doing in the space, so you want to see that they've got some runs.
Yeah, and I would think for a SIL provider, specifically, that's even more important because of that care element. Because I feel like if you're going from being a builder to being an SDA provider, that's less of a jump because you know building at least, and you could be an expert in building. And if you've got the right heart or the right intention, you could be values aligned around product knowledge and specifications and knowing all those really important things. But if a SIL provider can't provide care, like that is their expertise, you know, so it seems like that would be a harder thing. And I have had a number of clients come to me and say, look, the SIL provider's doing a really bad job, or, you know, I want to be an SDA provider, but what's stopping me being an SDA provider is I haven't done this before, and people want people with experience. And I'm always kind of saying, well, you're experienced in building, but, you know, you need to lead with heart if that's what it's about. But I think that can be a barrier for good providers entering if they haven't done SDA before. So I guess it's that conversation of other runs on the board. Did you find that as an SDA provider entering the space?
I only entered the space in 2020, and I was not in the industry before then. I hadn't done real estate. I had not done anything to do with disability. But I found that, you know, I had empathy. I knew what it took to stand up a building or a house, because I had some experience with property development. But I also knew when to ask for help and when to look for support and when to look for, you know, a consultant. I knew enough that I wasn't going to be able to do it on my own and with the lack of experience that I had. But I knew I had the sole goal, which was to actually try and, you know, if I could make any improvement in the homes that they were moving into from the hospital, from the nursing home, if I could just do that well, I think the rest of it would follow. And so that was kind of how I entered it. And, yeah, I mean, there are obstacles not being in the industry, and sometimes you're not taken seriously. But, you know, we've got now, you know, close to 7 or 8 buildings, and I think, you know, that also gives me the confidence that we're doing something right.
Yeah, you definitely got the runs on the board now.
But, you know, in the beginning, it's aligning with someone who can trust in your capability, may not necessarily, you know, that you can tell that you don't have the experience, but you've got the know-how to get something done. And the developers as well, trusting that you can do, you know, you can do what you say you're going to do.
Yeah. And from your perspective, Karen, what do you think makes a great SDA provider?
I probably, before I entered this space, I didn't realise how ethical you do need to be, because you're really playing with people's lives. I think that when I first started, and the stories I would hear from participants about being promised accommodation, and at the week before moving in, the offer being pulled and given to someone, and unbeknownst to them, but given to someone who's come through the door with higher funding, and this person's put all the plans in place to actually move into this accommodation or their forever home. And the amount of the repeated stories I heard of that nature, SDA providers almost silently bidding these properties to the highest bidder or to the person with the highest funding, with no sort of care or thought around what it's taken for that person. And sometimes it's months getting ready, gearing up to move into that place, foregoing wherever they've come from. And I think that the level of honesty, transparency, doing the right thing is so important to be an SDA provider. And you can probably get away with it the first time, the second time, but it quickly becomes apparent when you're not really doing it the ethical way. Yeah.
So as an SDA provider, what would be your piece of advice for someone looking to enter as an SDA provider?
Do your due diligence around, if you are going to build your own versus collaborate with a developer that you're going to be renting from. I think you need to do the numbers. You also need to speak to as many people as possible in the industry and understand how the SDA funding works. It's not what you see is not what you get. There is a lot of layers of complexity around the price guide, what funding is aligned to the participant, what funding the dwelling gets. So it's really about making sure that you've done your homework, and being, aligning yourself with, I guess, a SIL provider from early on to help you understand, where you're going to, what participants the types of participants you're going to have in your dwelling, what categories and where the demand might sit in the market.
Yeah. Is there anything you would add to that?
No, just to your earlier point about if you want to become an SDA provider, or in that instance a SIL provider, and you haven't done it before, then my only advice is to just spend some time learning. Be a sponge, go out and engage, a consultant, or go and learn from somebody, get a mentor, go and become knowledgeable about what you want to deliver, because you will quickly become unstuck in a space, because people, unlike a few years ago, people are understanding it a lot more now, so you will get challenged on it all the time, and so you should, so by participants, by stakeholders, by people in the space. So that's it.
I think the thing for me about SDA specifically, NDIS is complex anyway, but SDA is like this own little sub-branch that adds so much more complexity to an already complex system. It has its own language. It has its own vocabulary. It has a million extra acronyms on top of already having so many that it's like I think I'm quite knowledgeable. I've been around since the rollout of the NDIS. So 10 years I've had to understand the NDIS landscape. But it took me a whole 12 months of dedicating myself to understanding SDA before I could actually say, I think I understand it. And I probably, the more that I learn, the more I realize I don't know. But it's not something that is really simple to understand. It's layers and layers of complexity. And back to your point, what's written on paper and how the scheme might have been written or intended to operate isn't actually how it operates in practicality.
That's right.
And so as an auditor, I can audit. I have audited not thousands, but at least hundreds of SDA providers. And what I knew as an auditor is so different to the realities of, even working with providers such as yourself to actually go, oh, right, the practical issues are so different than the implied or the written rules, I guess. There's so many layers to it that I could imagine it was really overwhelming as where to start. If someone's looking to become a SIL provider, I often tell them to walk before they run and start with community access. Start with something easy that you have an idea about. Start with a school holiday program if you come from that space. Start providing care and understand care and scaffold your learning over a period of time. Don't jump to doing a high complex SIL 3-on-1 or and investing time, effort, resources, money into it. Learn it easier. But for SDA, there's not really an easier entry point. You have to jump all in. So it's not like you can do it as a side hustle and still be doing other things. Someone in the organisation has to actually commit to being an expert in that space.
And to be fair, Karen and I were having conversations, 12 months out before the first building, when you were just looking to become an SDA provider. So you spent a long time just going to expos and SDA forums and having conversations with support coordinators and all that stuff before you even delved into your first. And I'm sorry, I'm probably talking on your behalf now.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
And you went and you looked at products.
That's
I remember we went on a number of walkthroughs. That's before and what other people were doing in SDA before you just delved in and decided to be an SDA provider.
That's right.
For the first product you went online.
Yeah. And even the accreditation process, getting to become one, the amount of knowledge you need to know on your compliance, what needs to be, documented, what even the guidelines, the desired guidelines themselves. I met quite a few SDA assessors who come out and basically make sure that you've met the requirements to the millimetre. And through them was able to go and see a lot of products that were being built. And I quickly saw the products that I didn't want to necessarily build myself and under our company, and you start to see what what is being done in the market and how you can do it better or differently.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's definitely it was a huge learning curve.
Yeah.
And you almost think going back, would you have taken the plunge if you knew what you know now?
Yeah.
And just when you think you know SDA, you know the rules, you know the price guide, it changes again, or it morphs into another system, and so there's constantly having to keep yourself.
It's not something that's set and forget.
No, definitely.
It's not a passive income stream.
No,
I've never found a business that is a passive income stream, mind you, but definitely not something that you can just set up and walk away from. It's this constant dedication to being a provider.
Absolutely.
It takes a lot of commitment.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Great. Well, I think that's it. I think we covered the relationship of SIL and SDA. Was there anything that either of you wanted to add about the relationship, or anything we've touched on today you wanted to expand on?
Not for me. I think we've covered it off really nicely.
Yep. I think if the relationship works, it can be awesome for everyone. And so, definitely having a lot of fun.
Yeah. Perfect. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of SDA Mastery by Tania Gomez Consulting. We hope you found this episode helpful and valuable. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, leave us a rating and share it with others. Until next time, keep learning.